Hey, I'm here with Reggie.
Good afternoon.
Reggie,
Yes, sir.
you know, we started out in this fairly temperate zone, but I think we're living in subtropical.
Feels like it.
Yeah, we're getting the warmth is moving northward. The birds don't travel the same way they used to. The maple trees don't give sap because the winter's not long enough. Yeah, things are changing.
And the Gulf is 98 degrees.
98 degrees. We're going to talk about that in a minute. All right, folks, it's delightful to have you here. Let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for those who are listening and those who will listen. We ask you that you would give a measure of the Holy Spirit as we speak and as they listen. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. This Prophetic Notes is a continuation of the Revelation Exegetical series. This next part is not for you people who are listening to me right now. It's for the people who are going to receive prophetic notes who haven't looked at 1 minute of the Revelation exegesis. So this is all going to be printed and sent out as a prophetic notes. If you haven't followed the studies here faithfully, you are missing an extremely important series. Much of what you have been taught, regardless of the sect you are or were in, is simply wrong, right?
Yep.
And you know, I noticed a line, Ray, that I have often quoted from someone who claimed to have the prophetic gift. And this person wrote, "We have much to unlearn."
Yeah. Many things to learn and many things to unlearn.
Many things to learn and many things to unlearn. And the people in that person's sect would be the last to agree.
Right.
In the following look at some of the current events that are fulfilling prophecy, the Revelation studies and their content are the basis for interpretation. I challenge you to keep reading. What is ahead is really, truly unimaginable, and no horror movie begins to compare. We can wish there would just be a zombie apocalypse, right? We could deal with that, right? That would be like playing in a sandbox. No, it's going to be way worse than that. This is a review of a few elements of prophecy that are being fulfilled before our eyes. A good place in Revelation to begin is at the moment the Lamb, Christ and the Holy Spirit, opens the sealed book. Do you know where that is?
Revelation.
Where Revelation? Where does he begin to open the seal?
2.
6. Okay. I've got it in the third paragraph here. First, we have to look at the final sequence of events where it begins. If you listen carefully to the Revelation exegetical studies, you know that the final events are compressed into one final period of 7 years. Huh? What are you talking about? Final 7 years. Well, you will remember if you have studied as a serious student, either as a dispensationalist or a historicist, you know that the 70th week is divided into 2 halves, each exactly 1,260 days long. The 70th week is a week of years. The 1,260 days are real days. Okay? And that happened long ago, according to historicism. Began in 27 AD and ended in 34 AD. That's what you get if you start with 457 BC, as you should. And so we have a period, suspiciously, that's 1,260 days long on 2 sides of the crucifixion. And then in Revelation 11, we have 42 months or 1,260 days or 3.5 years before the 2 great prophets are killed and rise on the 3rd day and ascend into heaven. Boy, that looks similar to what happened in the past. And then in Revelation 12, there's another period of 1260 days. Another one where the woman flees into the wilderness, and it's the Great Tribulation. So yeah, there was 7 years in the past, and there's going to be 7 years in the future. And that, Reggie, is predictable because what kind of time are we talking about? We're not talking about linear time.
No, cyclic.
Cyclic time. A cycle means that if something happened in the past, what?
It's going to happen again in the future.
It's going to happen in the future.
The end is the beginning also.
The end is the beginning.
And the beginning is the end.
Okay, so where in Revelation are we? As you know, Revelation 1 to 3, after the introduction, contains the messages to the 7 churches. Then chapters 4 and 5 show the judgment scene in the heavenly Holy of Holies, the throne room of God. Then, now the Lamb has the little book in his hands, then comes the opening of the 7 seals of judgment. That happens in chapter 6, starting at verse 1. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come!" And I looked, and behold, a white horse. That was not expected. And its rider had a bow and a crown, a Stephanos, the laurel victory wreath was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. In rapid succession, the seer sees a red horse, indicative of the huge bloodshed by the wars this hero has caused. Then a black horse, indicative of the massive death involved, including not just the warfare itself, but the famine and disease that has resulted in the war. And ultimately, a puke green horse. We recognize that as the technical term for the color of the 4th horse ray. We find that all over academic literature. Puke green, the color of the many bodies left outside to rot as per the body farm. I assume you all know what the body farm is. How do we know when this poor gal was murdered, right? Well, judging by what we see in the body farm, that was about 3 months and 2 days ago, right? It can be that precise. And then you look and you see, well, what kind of a day was it? Did anybody go missing around then? And we're off to the races. This pattern is a normal one that occurred in every single age. This is not new. These 4 horsemen go around and around in every cycle. This is the way the world works. Long before Revelation was given to John, in every age since. But Revelation is uniquely and specifically centered on the end time and final events. So, yeah, the pattern happens a lot, but this pattern is the one that happens at the end of the age. Universal war, resulting massive death. The beginning of the sequence, we're told the result would be massive loss of life. The warfare described in this passage is universal. The famine and disease that result will take more lives than all the wars in past ages. If the first rider, horse, was permitted to take peace from the earth. Well, didn't that happen during World War I and World War II? Yet peace was, in a sense, taken away from the earth. But, you know, you could live in parts of the earth where you didn't even know the First World War existed. Less so, but also true, you could live in parts of the earth and not be too bothered about the Second World War, right? And I'm sure there were folks in Borneo who looked up who couldn't believe, what are those things flying around in the air, right?
Yeah.
Right? And there's
Big birds.
And there's that famous movie set in Africa, The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
They're flying along in a plane and the guy has finished his Coke and he throws it out.
Throws the bottle out.
Throws the bottle out. And the bottle lands in front of an African bushman, right?
Yeah.
Who takes it as a sign from the gods, right? And then he proceeds towards civilization. And the more he finds out about civilization, the more he thinks what? The gods are crazy, right? All right. But this is really a universal statement. Take peace from the earth. This could really only happen at the end, right? At the end of the sequence, that's the opening line of the sequence. The last line of the sequence is, and they, the 4 horsemen, were given authority over the fourth of the earth to kill, given authority to kill over a fourth of the earth with sword, famine and pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. Okay, we got four things there: sword, famine, pestilence, disease, and wild beasts. And these are all going to take a lot of life. What? The animals? Yep, the animals. Notice the rule that Revelation is its own interpreter. Well, there's massive disagreement and myriad interpretations of this passage. Symbolism is interpreted immediately. So there's no need for all this nonsense on the internet. The four horsemen kill in four ways: by sword, worldwide war, much more complete than the so-called world wars of the 20th century. This process will involve every human alive, then famine, the natural result of universal war, then massive disease, and finally the animals themselves, trying to stay alive, I might say, with the self-preservation instinct, find that one of the best foods they can eat is humans.
You people.
Let's think, for instance, of the failing wheat harvest in the last 3 years in the U.S. And couple with that the fact that the two other breadbaskets of the world are eastern Ukraine and the steppes of southern Russia, neither of which are under cultivation and harvest during this dangerous war. I will say further on why this is such a dangerous war. This isn't like another little spat on the border between two insignificant countries. The rapidly shrinking emergency food supply is only the beginning. The weather will play a part, as further along in Revelation we find that discussed. But the war itself brings the massive death illustrated by the red horse and horseman. The black horse and horseman has a scale, and a voice from the throne of God proclaims serious famine prices. And of course, if there's massive famine, then a lot of people are going to die, and a lot of other people will die from the diseases because their immune systems are down because they haven't eaten enough, right? Finally, the massive loss of human life and desperation of the animals that are still alive sees them as losing domestic niceties for the simple reality of staying alive. The animals, both wild and domestic, will eat humans, live humans and dead humans. This is plainly stated in words too simple to avoid. Massive death is predicted here, make no mistake. The Lord Jesus Christ stated, we're going to find out we'll kill half of the population in this one little sequence. The Lord Jesus Christ stated, a time of trouble would come, unlike anything that ever existed since the world began. Indeed, the Lord said, the troubles of that period would have to be shortened, or no flesh would survive alive. So we're talking about all the way down to hardly anybody alive, and God cuts that off, so there'll still be somebody alive when Christ comes, right?
Right.
That's how far away from the 8 billion people we have now. But for the elect's sake, he said, that time would be shortened. So there will quickly come a time that will deteriorate to a question of whether any life would be able to continue. Right in the passage under consideration, a fourth of mankind is lost to death. The race of Adam. Now, I'm not talking about humanoids. People will tell you humans go back 400,000 years. No, humanoids go back 400,000 years. But the race of Adam was a distinct special creation that we find in Genesis 1 to 2:4-8. Wait a minute. It says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So the heavens and the earth were created just at the moment that Adam and Eve were created. No. It would be nice if that's what the Hebrew actually said. But unfortunately, it follows a pattern that's we see in the second creation story and has to be translated. When God began to create the sky and the ground, we can't say earth. Why can't we say earth, Ray?
Because they didn't know about planets.
As soon as we say earth to a modern reader, what does the reader know we're talking about?
they think of a sphere that's going around the sun.
We're talking about the planet we live on.
Yeah.
Nobody, they were centuries, actually centuries away from having any concept of a planet as such. Okay? And so we have to say, when God began to create the earth, no. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, no. When God began to create the sky, actually it's plural, skies, and the ground, the land, right? Eretz is land. We have in Jerusalem as a rival to the Jerusalem Post, we have Haaretz, the land. That's the title of the newspaper, the land. The land, when God began to create the sky and the ground or land, the land was tohu vavohu. What?
Chaotic and empty.
Yeah, chaotic and empty. All right. So, Jesus said there would be no flesh alive. The race of Adam, that's that race we belong to that was created much more recently than 400,000 years ago, right? We'll reach about 8 billion souls. Now this is the folks, you and I and others, who have a brain that has spiritual perceptions and concepts, right? The great apes are very intelligent. Yes, they can make implements. Yes, they can bury their dead. Yes, the humanoids did that. No, they are not responsible for their moral choices, right? You have to have frontal lobes for that to work, big ones. Lose a quarter of that, and we're talking about 2 billion dead. 2 billion dead. We certainly have the tools and implements of war to destroy that many, just buttons need to be pressed. As I pointed out elsewhere, this horror is one of the reasons the world comes to accept the rule of a single power headed by a man who, under Satan's direct management, promises to solve humanity's collective problems and save, that's the key word, those who are still alive. Take 8 billion souls, remove a quarter, we're talking about peace having been taken from the entire earth. So this doesn't mean people are going to die just in Europe or just in the United States, but across the world. You have 2 billion dead and 6 billion left. Further along, in the final 7 years, shortened to less than 7 years, lest life on earth be extinguished, yet another third of the remaining living will be slaughtered. By these 3 plagues, a third of mankind was killed by the fire and smoke and sulfur coming from their mouths. 8 billion less 1 quarter is 6 billion, and take away a third of that, what do you have? A third of 6 is 2. So what do you end up with? 4 billion. We're halfway to the finish. Not all the way, right? Half of all humans have died. How does the rest of the other half feel right now?
Total panic.
Yeah. I would accept anybody who said, especially if he exhibited supernatural powers. Right? This guy can do miracles. He's God's man. Oh, Christ appeared over there and said, listen to him. Right? Christ appears hither and yon. Why? Because the devil wants to be worshipped. By Revelation 9, the earth has lost half of its current population in horrific ways. And that extends to all flesh, including those parts of the animal world still alive, by which time they will have become predators, desperately trying to stay alive, including the weakened human race, as potential food. Well, that's going to be some pretty horrifying deaths. And at that point, the world will only be halfway to the end point, where the whole 7-year process must be cut short for the sake of the righteous, who don't deserve to die because of what the great majority of mankind have done. These things are real, and we only need to look around to see the way these things can be triggered. Warfare was the first on the list. So let's think about warfare. The template of Daniel 11. Now, what is that? Well, there's the king of the north and the king of the south. 2 great powers. 2 great powers are control of the ancient world, and they're fighting for control. But Daniel 11 is not about our time, but what would have happened had the Messianic kingdom come. Daniel 11 tells us that the world will be divided between two great and vicious powers, each willing to risk the end of human life to gain control of the world state. These two powers, very simply, right?
Yep.
You couldn't have, in 1950, you couldn't tell me, right?
Yeah.
You know what?
Yes.
China disappeared in 1949. It became a communist state and cut itself off deliberately from the rest of the world. Nobody talked to China. Nobody went to China. Nobody knew anything about China. It was gone. Right?
Uh-huh.
Was it one of the great powers of the world in 1950?
Oh, no.
No.
Non-existent. Russia wasn't one of the great powers of the world. In 1950, there was only one great power, right? And that was
United
the United States, right? You didn't have what you have in Daniel 11 back then. I was alive then. It's hard to believe. But now we can say it's not going to change. It's the American Empire and the Chinese Empire. It's not going to change. Neither of these two are going to give up what they have, right? And at that point, the world will only be halfway to the end point. Wow. Okay. Now the beginning of the final sequence is the white horse going forth to conquer. He's given a bow indicating that this is a human conqueror. It's not Jesus. Jesus doesn't cause massive blood flow, right? You go from the white horse to the red horse. It's not Jesus. People who say that prove to us they have no idea what Revelation is about. It's a human conqueror. He's given a bow. That's the first thing he needs. This is basic warfare in Roman times, right? You're going to start the war. What do you need first? You need a big bow to rain down fire on your enemies from heaven.
Send your archers out and soften up the enemy.
Maybe you can kill or wound as much as 10% of them.
Right?
Wow. Right? By raining down fire from heaven through your archery contingent. So let's begin there and take a long look at the position of the Chinese Empire in relation to the American Empire and the world in general. At the moment, the Chinese look to be in a strong position to gain control of the world state. A lot of people are placing their money on China.
They would be wrong.
China meets none of the qualifying descriptors found in Revelation 13, whereas the United States admirably fulfills every single one. So look, we're not risking things and saying we know the outcome, the eventual outcome, right?
Right.
But a lot of misery has to go on before we get to that eventual outcome. Now, okay, the United States is woefully undermanned in every way compared to China. The Chinese are far more, well, they're just underhanded, but they're good at it, right? If you're going to be underhanded, it's good to do it well, right? But you can't go by that. The United States has been unprepared for every war it was in, except the Mexican War, right?
It always has to be awakened and get motivated before it ramps up.
Even a created war like the Spanish-American War in 1898, you would have thought, since they wanted to capture the Philippines and Puerto Rico and Cuba and all the other possessions they took from Spain, that they would have been prepared. They didn't even have food for an army. In the Mexican-American War, they began to think about, well, Mexico is going to attack Texas. When the United States annexed Texas and turned it from an independent country into another state, they expected Mexico to attack. And they made preparations for that. And they won. And what did they win? Well, they won California up all the way up to Monterey. That was part of Mexico. Why is it not now? Because it was taken in the Mexican-American War. And California, they got all of what's now Arizona, all of what's now New Mexico, and all the way up to southern Utah, right? And they made the Rio Grande a convenient border, right? But all of that was part of Mexico. And they paid $18 million for it, right? Okay? But most of the time, the United States is not prepared for war, right? You remember Yamamoto just prior to the Second World War? Okay. Yes, he will go ahead and plan this attack on Pearl Harbor. But what does he tell the rest of the military junta that's now embarking on this endeavor? He had been trained, he did his higher education in the United States. What did he tell the rest of them? Yes, I'll make it and it will succeed. I will prepare it and it will succeed. But this is a huge mistake. Right? What did he say? You're going to awaken a sleeping giant. Don't do this. Right?
And he was right.
Okay, the United States has a way of winning if winning is the goal, which was not in the Korean War, lest the World War II conflict be reignited. They just wanted to stop the insurgency from China and North Korea into the Korean Peninsula, right? That was the goal. Well, the commanding general didn't want to do that. He wanted to win. And the President of the United States, Truman, had to go over and relieve him of his capacities to say, no, we're not actually fighting a war like the Second World War. Nor did, ironically, winning was not the goal in the Vietnam War either. Same thing. We want the insurgency from the northern part of Vietnam, the Buddhist part, to stop and protect French Indochina, which was the southern part of the Vietnamese area, right? And that was Catholic. French Indochina, the population was Catholic. So you got a northern population is Buddhist, a southern population is Catholic, and when the French abandoned it, they told the Americans, we've made it two countries. We can't hold it, right? It's up to you. And that was why the Vietnam War was so horrible, because winning was not the goal, right?
It was containment.
Containment, that's right. That's a good word, Rich. Exactly, containment. However, the final conflict, as judged by the description of Revelation, will be total war. No rules of engagement in international conventions. Let's think about the current situation. There is an active war involving the largest nuclear arsenal on Earth. That's not ours, that's Russia. And its former possession, Ukraine. I mean, there's a lot of Russian people living in Ukraine because it was a part of Russia. The Western powers, read the American Empire and its key elements, the 10 nations that will rule with it briefly in the seventh final period in Revelation 17:12, are determined to snatch Ukraine from the jaws of its traditional enemy, Russia. Russia, not just Putin, Russia. It doesn't matter. Somebody can kill Putin tonight. That's not going to change things. Russia has warned that there must be a buffer between its borders and the NATO countries, which are themselves politically and militarily extensions of American power. Why are they so nuts that they already have a long border with NATO countries? Well, if the NATO countries decide to shoot nuclear missiles from there, it's going to be 4 minutes till Moscow ceases to exist. You see the problem? You see here it says, Russia no longer has the advantage of half of Europe up to the middle of divided Germany under its control. The Western powers weren't anywhere close to Russia, right? There was always a big deal. They've got thousands of tanks lined up here. And so NATO has thousands of tanks lined up here to try to stop that. Yeah, this is before nuclear war, right? So Russia no longer has the advantage. We can understand. Well, now China has said, okay, we're going to put weapons and troops in Cuba, right? And that has the United States outraged, right? Well, that's to help out the Russians. And right there is another point of contention where the United States the last time almost went to nuclear war to make sure there were not nuclear weapons in Cuba, right? So Russia's conditions, preconditions, have been increasingly and deliberately ignored. Its attempt to preempt the danger has set up the world for extremely dangerous widening conflict. Despite its pride, Russia is the key underling of the Chinese Empire. It's not the great future power. Today, as I'm writing this, Finland has entered NATO yesterday, 2 days ago, and its flag has been raised with the others, each sworn to defend the others from Russian encroachment. Norway, its close ally, was a founding member of NATO. So now we've got Finland and Norway both, right?
Right.
Now there's another power up there, right?
And Finland borders Norway, so doesn't, borders Russia. And
That's right.
So doesn't Norway.
So does, yes, and that's the problem. Now, Sweden, perhaps the biggest and most militarily powerful of the three, isn't a member of NATO because it was having a spat with Turkey. But the strongman of Turkey, Erdogan, was impressed that he should drop his objection, which he did. Today, Turkey dropped its objection. Sweden will shortly be a member of NATO. Now, 3 large, stable Scandinavian countries have added a huge military and political bloc to NATO. Russia's northern outlet to the Barents Sea now opens upon NATO allies. And its outlet to the Baltic Sea at St. Petersburg, you all know how important St. Petersburg is now entirely blocked by Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany, Poland. Every single country that surrounds the Baltic Sea is members of NATO. Even 3 small countries who are already in danger. Here's right on the east coast of the Baltic Sea are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They were admitted to NATO in 2004, and their eastern border is with Russia. The catch is each of them borders Russia directly. That they are weak, and NATO was not close by to protect them, is no longer the case, right? Do you see, Ray, how dangerous the situation has become? Right? Nobody took the Russians seriously that you must not do this. Well, no, we're going to. Since today, the U.S. president announced that the decision of NATO was that the future of the Ukraine was with NATO, right?
Right.
Now, Russia's whole western border is up against NATO. And what are we saying is going to be the case with your southern border? In the eastern third of Russia, where all the great...
That's going to be NATO territory also.
That's going to be NATO territory.
They're going to be completely surrounded on their western and southern border.
Yeah, on the western and southern border. In the western third of the country where all the power is.
I should say southwestern border to be specific.
Yeah, because
Southern European border.
They have all this other stuff, but it doesn't
Right.
border on the parts of Russia there are where the peasantry lives.
Right.
All right. The great fear of Russia that nuclear weapons might be 4 minutes from Moscow has now become a reality. Well, the argument is, don't put your ICBMs in Poland. Well, maybe we will, maybe we won't. Russia has the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons on Earth. Russia and the U.S. have 90% of all nuclear missiles, about 11,000 out of 12,500. China has about 400 such missiles and rapidly growing. China has assured help to Russia, sort of NATO style. Both countries share the hatred of the U.S. and the feeling that the American trick is to surround them with allies that America's pledged to save if China or Russia attacks them militarily. The U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, visited China after months of asking for an audience and was lectured by the Chinese strongman Xi Jinping about the American policy of actively competing militarily with other great powers, which he means Russia and China, by surrounding them with military. Hence their buildup of bases on atolls all across the South China Sea, the better to monitor American activity and as staging grounds for invading Taiwan, the island nation that broke off from China when it became a communist state in 1949. While she has warned Russia about using nuclear weapons in the Ukrainian war, both are busily preparing for a nuclear war they consider inevitable, which is also why parts of the American empire, such as France and Israel, are also building up their nuclear capacities as quickly as possible. Not long ago, France didn't have much of a navy. It's now got 4 nuclear subs, and it's rapidly expanding them. Okay, and of course, nuclear arsenals grow as global arms race takes shape. Sure, of course they do. Why is this of interest? Because notice where it's from, the Jerusalem Post. The report from Sweden's Stockholm International Peace Research Institute also examined China's nuclear arsenal, which has increased from 350 estimated warheads to 410. Depending on how it decides to structure its forces, China could potentially have at least as, get this, at least as many intercontinental ballistic missiles as either USA or Russia. Are you kidding me? By the turn of the decade. With Iran on the verge of nuclear weapons and under China's control, their traditional enemy, Saudi Arabia, will doubtless be the next in the succession of nuclear powers. Last week, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who's really running the country, his father is only a figurehead, the United States and Britain created Saudi Arabia in the early 20th century. And it's called Saudi Arabia because they chose as the person most likely to unite the Arabs and be able to control them, a man named Ibn Saud. And that Ibn Saud was the father of every king of Saudi Arabia from then to now. Okay? Which is why the old fella is still on the throne. Because so far they've maintained that the original founder of the country's sons are running the deal. But who's really running it is the grandson, Mohammed ibn Saud, MIB. And he just last week, I could have put an article in here. Just last week, they signed a huge trade deal with China. And they're going to get Chinese help in the development of technology, which they've always relied on the United States to do. Saudi Arabia, traditionally part of the American empire, has done about face and courted China as a willing overlord.
Which tells you that Crown Prince isn't really all that pleased with the United States.
Oh, he's very displeased with the United States. Very, very displeased. One of the things that he's displeased about is, yeah, we'll give you all kinds of jets and stuff, but we won't give you nuclear weapons. Well, I think if I were him, I could figure this out. okay, the whole world has become nuclear weaponized. Our enemies here in the region are about to become. What should I do? Well, I'd play the great powers off of each other, go over here to China and say, hey, we see you're in Iran, you want to come over and help us, but we do want nuclear weapons. Now, here's an interesting article. That's Xi Jinping, who is the strongman of China and has won an unprecedented third term. He's the most powerful man since the founder, Mao Zedong. Prepares China for extreme scenarios, including conflict with the West. Xin Kamrong, an influential foreign policy scholar, didn't mince words about his interpretation, telling the Global Times, a nationalist newspaper of the Communist Party, that the extreme scenarios she referred to mean the danger of war. Well, who might Xi Jinping and the Chinese populace of 1,300,000,000 people be worried they might be going to war against?
The United States of America and its NATO allies.
Yep. With the endgame of war in sight, China has restricted the flow of minerals to the West that are essential for making weaponry. In addition, China is experimenting with weapons that control the mind of the enemy. China crafts weapons to alter brain function, report says, tech meant to influence government leaders. Okay. China's People's Liberation Army is developing high-technology weapons designed to disrupt brain functions and influence government leaders or entire populations, according to a report by 3 open-source intelligence analysts. The weapons can be used to directly attack or control brains using microwave or other directed energy weapons in handheld guns, or larger weapons firing electromagnetic beams, adding that the danger of China's brain warfare weapons prior to or during a conflict is no longer theoretical. Now, this is scary, but of course, I want to say this. In a democracy, it's harder to contain information, right? In the absolute control that the Chinese Communist Party exercises, it's easier to keep things secret. But what are we telling you right here? Are their secrets all that good? No. We're knowing what we know what you're doing. And has the United States lost its ability? No. Right? You do understand that American ingenuity is busily trying to race into these same weapons, right? Unknown to many, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and its People's Liberation Army, and it isn't just an army, they don't have an air force and a navy and so forth, it's all one thing, have established themselves as world leaders in the development of neurostrike weapons, according to the 12-Age report, enumerating, targeting, and collapsing the Chinese Communist Party's neurostrike program. The Washington Times obtained a copy of the study. So they're studying what they're going to do to keep China from successfully doing this. And, you know, I wouldn't want just the Chinese to be stopped from doing it. I would want to know that the Americans are going to do it, right? China controls minerals that run the world, and it just fired a warning shot at the U.S. It is now well known in the West, particularly the U.S., that many of the minerals essential not only for our advanced weaponry, but also for regular goods, depends on minerals sourced and produced by China. Rare earth minerals in particular, which are already in short supply, are now on China's do not sell list, meaning deprive the U.S. not only of electric cars and batteries, but its most advanced weaponry. Just another aspect of the growing rivalry. The white horse is already galloping, going forth to conquer. But the rider has a crown, and that crown will not go to China in the ultimate, right? Meanwhile, on a different note, The aftermath of the COVID crisis, a manipulated man-made crisis. Oh, I want to say something about that. Was the virus made in a laboratory? Of course it was. You know? The membrane has animal genes in it. You've grown part of this in an animal. That's what you do in a lab. That's how you do it. Okay? Well, what about the Wuhan lab? Nobody went to look until a year after, and the people who went to look were people who were involved in that lab. Americans and French and British. What? That lab was a lab funded by all the countries. Nobody wanted to have China making bioweapons that we didn't know anything about, right? Okay, so the French set up the lab. The Wuhan lab was created by France because it's got a very advanced system. Let's show them how to do it. Okay. The material came from the United States, right? Came right out of North Carolina. The world's leading authority on these bat viruses wasn't the bat woman in China. It was a professor right at the University of North Carolina. She learned everything she knew from him, right?
Uh-huh.
But there was a period in the 1980s and 1990s and the early 2000s when the United States just kind of said, oh, let's do everything we can for our dear friend China, right? And this was part of the whole story, right? All right. So, was it the Wuhan lab or wasn't it? Well, there's no evidence it was the Wuhan lab. And the first cases, this is a city of 11 million people, right? There's only 8 million people in Greater New York. 11 million people. This is a big city. And like most great cities, it's on a river, a water source. And that market they closed down was 11 miles away on the other side of the river. And that's where most of the cases showed up. Well, that's odd. Now, mind you, I'm not saying that it was deliberate. China did not release this dangerous virus on its own populace. That wasn't the plan, right? But God has a way of messing up the plans of men. Okay, so, but there is something interesting. Right in that compound of level 2 labs, and then there was this level 4 lab thanks to Western powers. But they also had something like the American government. It's actually patterned on the American government. We have something called the Center for Disease Control, CDC, right? Uh-huh. And it was right there in this complex. But that year, 2019, they moved this lab out of that complex, across the river 11 miles away, about a mile from that meat market. Okay. And I will tell you that it's obvious what they were doing. They had developed this. They did not want to share it with their partners. They didn't want the United States or France or all these other powers to know the level that they had got it to. And they took it and they moved it away where nothing was known about it. So we have all these powers looking at the Wuhan lab and saying, maybe, but then there was all this outbreak over there by that market. Well, you're looking at the wrong lab. Right?
Duh.
All right. So the thing escaped, and then it did kill a million people here, right? That's a lot of people, right? And it's almost pathetic. They did exactly the wrong thing. They put people on ventilators. They created, they further exacerbated the problem and killed people. You know, it was the ventilators of death. That's what they put them on. Right? They had a cytokine storm going in people, all sorts of things. And then you look at the studies afterwards. Nobody whose blood studies were actually done who had a high level of vitamin D3 is known to have died from COVID. That's incredible. Right? It's not even a hard thing to produce. But
It's
of course,
cheap too.
it's cheap. Yeah, it is. You can get one of those little tabs, you can hardly even see it when you're swallowing it, with 10,000 units in it, right? So, lots of, and after all, why did it affect the United States worse than anywhere else? Well, that was not initially set out to be released by the Chinese to kill lots of Americans. I don't think China realized how sickly Americans are, right? They didn't know that most Americans are deficient of basic stuff that you have to stay alive, right? But this revealed it, and they found out that their unfinished weapon of mass destruction really could destroy masses in a country that was not in good shape physically. But of course, you had to lock everybody down. You didn't have to. That was part of the plan. That was part of the plan of what was supposed to happen when it was actually released. But it got released too soon. And of course, by the time they figured out that this was happening, by the time the Chinese figured out this was happening, gazillion people had gone to the United States, and gazillion people had come from the United States back, right? So by then, where was this virus? Everywhere. That's one of the unintended consequences of globalism. And as I say further on, when you hear the phrase unintended consequences, what does it usually mean? It usually means bad consequences, right? Something we didn't think about, right? So, of course, the world's food supply is disappearing as climate change upsets the system. That and war and such things as China's massive crop failure last year, well, for the last 3 years. Now remember, China's 1,300,000,000 people. You can't not have corn or wheat or soybeans. Those are the three great crops. Wheat, corn, and soybeans in that order, right? Mm-hmm. And those aren't doing well. Here in Wikipedia, 2022-23 food crises. The causes were disruption in supply chains from COVID-19 pandemic and energy crisis, see 21-23 global energy crisis, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and some effects of climate change on agriculture. Significant floods and heat waves in 2021. Stop right there. One reason we're almost out of food is because of significant floods and heat waves in 2021. What year is it as we're talking?
2023.
2023. Surely there have been no floods and heat waves now.
Oh boy. Do we have some or do we have some?
You know what they told the people in some of those small towns in Vermont? It's too late. There are no roads to your town. Even if we wanted to come and get you, we can't. They're all underwater. shelter in your house and go to the highest place in your house. Now, in this thing that, remember Hurricane Katrina and the Ninth Ward, right? The hurricane had already passed. People went into their attics and were calling out for the authorities to come get them. It's understandable why they went into the attics. They did not take the one thing with them they needed.
An axe.
An axe. And so hundreds of people were found dead in their attics, right in their own house. And I was thinking, you know, probably the authorities in Vermont don't know that. You've just killed a lot of people. Tell them if you take shelter and you have to go up into your attic and you can't get on your roof from the outside, when you go into that attic, take a strong axe with you. All right. So yeah. So we've had floods and heat waves. Anybody having a heat wave in 2023?
Question is more likely who is not having
Yeah, who
a
is
heat
not
wave
having a heat wave?
in 2023? And if you haven't experienced it, there's time yet.
You know, when you're talking about the Northwest Territories, do you know where the Northwest Territories are? They're north of the Canadian large. Well, yeah, it's next to the of northern Alaska, right?
Mm-hmm.
Last week they were at 101 in the capital of the Northwest Territories. In the capital of the Northwest Territories, they were at 101. Not heat equivalent, actual temperature. Okay? So look, there were people who should have known better, who denied that there was such a thing as global warming. That's because the great energy companies, in order to produce energy, you have to have certain ingredients. And those ingredients are the same ingredients that are the basis of a lot of medicines, big pharma, and are produced by big agri. So these companies are all aligned with each other. They own each other, right? And their goal is not to be humanitarians. What is the great goal?
Make money.
The great goal is to make money for your stockholders.
And to garner power.
Yeah. The great international corporations are the backbone of the world state. Okay? Spain and Portugal experienced droughts in early 2022, losing 60 to 80% of the crops in some areas. Yeah. Okay. Well, you're writing about what was available to comment on at the time the article was written, but what? Oh, we're living in worse right now. The hope that bumper crops will come this year or next is dashed by the reality of global warming. Yep, good old global warming is finally here long before the models said it would be this bad. But the models, ever more accurate, predict a world where neither food crops nor marine life can supply enough food. Part of the death of marine life, studies by oceanographers tell us that 90% of the food crops that come from the ocean that existed in 1950 no longer exist. Now, something is going to happen that's much worse. That is that the backbone of the life chain in the ocean is the reefs. But water this hot, guess what?
Coral reefs die.
They die.
It's going to kill the reefs.
And then, of course, you've got the acidification of the ocean, too, taking place.
Because the carbon dioxide, it would have been a lot hotter, but the carbon dioxide has been absorbed by the ocean. But now oceanographers tell us, no, the ocean has absorbed as much as it can. No other nations in fulfilling their pledges to lower carbon fuel consumption. Experts tell us that the world has already warmed 1.2 degrees centigrade since the Industrial Revolution. The tipping point is 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is predicted to occur in the next few years. If the nations had met their quotas, there would be less dire need for the Antichrist to promise that he can fix all these problems and prevent further war. The Apostle Paul said to the Thessalonians about the Antichrist disappearing, "Then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming." That tells me something. This tells us that despite all the horrible death and mayhem as the final 7 years progress, the Antichrist himself will still be alive when Christ comes. This is to be expected. If Satan would protect anyone, it would be his human vassal. There's more. Picture the billions dying and the desperate and terrified billions left alive. Then will come the great age of Spiritism, as the deceived masses communicate, as they wrongly think, with their departed loved ones, who will tell them to hang in there with the Antichrist. He is above all else the agency of deception. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity. The word is energeia. That's where we get the word energy from. But it is only used in the New Testament of supernatural or superhuman exertion by God or Satan. It's not something that a human can exert. The energeia of Satan, with all power, there's nothing limited here, and false, pseudos, the only time it's used in the New Testament. Intentional deception, by using what is not what it seems to be. Okay? Signs and wonders. Not that they're false, not that they're not supernatural, but they are pseudos. Right? We use the word pseudonym and so forth, right? We know what that means. In the coming period of the Great Tribulation, there'll be absolutely no point in arguing with the true situation with the lost. Increasingly, there'll be no one, and finally no one at all, who's not made a final decision. Revelation is clear on where along the timeline the close of human probation occurs, where no one can ever be moved to change their final decision. God stands behind free choice, and stands behind the decision made in eternity that sin must at last have its complete, unrestrained say, its final demonstration. The absolute proof that sin cannot exist and is always self-destructive, right? Sin can't exist. Well, why does it exist? Because God keeps it alive. Well, why didn't he just let it take its toll on the first sinners? Because the first thing they did was say God is a tyrant and they die. What does that mean? What would anybody, any thinking being, looking at that, conclude?
Oh, better behave ourselves, obey God, or he's going to kill us.
And as soon as you start to fear, you're no longer obeying, and love goes out the window, and nobody would have survived that. Right? Nobody would have survived that. No thinking being would have survived that. It must have its unrestrained say, its final demonstration. With all, pas means every type, utterly unrestrained, all power, and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing because they refused to love the truth, and so be saved. Therefore, this is why it's pointless to argue. Therefore, God sends them a strong, there's that word energeia again, superhuman, supernatural delusion, so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. What can you say to someone who's been convinced by God? Right? That's what you wanted to believe. Now God makes it impossible for you to believe anything else but. Notice that the same word is used of God's activity and Satan's activity, for in the final time, unlike any other, their purposes merge completely. Satan hopes to win the right to the earth by destroying anyone left in the service of God, but that will not be in the outcome. The demons ultimately will not succeed, and their hopes are in vain. They already know the time of final retribution is nearing. Now, we mentioned that the widening world war is the opening salvo of final events. We noted that the big ally of China was Russia, important because it holds the nuclear power that could stand up to the American empire, and that the widening war would take a huge toll on human and animal life. That was only the beginning. The shrinking supply of world food reserves, certainly happening now, is indeed an element of the rider of the black horse. There we shift from the war itself to the bloodletting and loss of life, the red horse, to the black horse of famine and worldwide disease. Disease because famine weakens the population and its ability to resist already present and brand new diseases. Hey, wait a minute. Brand new diseases.
Yeah, they're coming.
Yes. The superheating that has already begun, and there are people in denial who should have known better. Look, most conservatives are in the Republican Party. That's
Correct.
the definition. Most Christians who are not black are in the Republican Party. Most Christians who are black are in the Democratic Party. Okay? All right. But the Republican Party is the party of big business. It's the party of the rich. It's the party of tax evasion and incentives for the rich, right? The Republican Party is the one that says there is no global warming, right? Now you're in that party because your religion as a Christian makes you conservative. And that party tells you there is no global warming, right? Do you see how this happened? So we have most Christians believing it's all a hoax.
Just like smoking doesn't cause cancer.
The very same company, the Hudson Institute, that went for 30 years telling the public that smoking and cancer had no relation, is the outlet that the great energy companies have used to say there is no global warming. The same place! At least you should have set up a different company. Yeah, but the masses are stupid. They don't know why they're being told what they're being told. But now there's something else going on here. There are people, you know why people should have known that there was going to be heating? Because Revelation says so.
Right.
Right?
And you know, funny thing is you can quote that to people all day long and they ignore it. They just don't believe it.
Well, it hadn't happened yet, but we'll see what happens when that happens. They'll be flocking to the Antichrist to say, yeah, do your thing, save us. But now what about these new diseases? The superheating that has already begun works on several principles at once. First, it destroys the ice. Right? The ice is melting even in Antarctica, and 4 times faster in the Arctic because there's no landmass supporting that ice. It's just in the water and it's melting. It's at the lowest level ever recorded this year. Ice reflects the sun's heat back into space, the so-called albedo effect.
So the less ice, the less reflection, the more absorption into the water.
Exactly. The heating already done right through the sun's minimum stage. Now, it's an 11-year cycle, but some of the experts on this field of study tell us they think from the signs the sun is making that it might go into solar maximum sooner. Well, that's what we need. Yes, indeed. That's exactly what we need, is for the sun, when all of this has happened in solar minimum, to go into its solar maximum phase. Now, the heating of the Earth is partially due to the sun itself. That's true. But the great mass of the heating has been done to the use of carbon fuels and the creation of massive herds of animals emitting methane. The number one release of methane is from swamps. It's a perfectly natural event. We have lots of swamps, and they are number one. Number two is the animals. Look, there's millions and millions of animals just in North America alone that never existed before. What are they there for?
Food.
For people to eat. That's what factory farming is. And that's the number two source of methane on Earth. Okay. Number 3 is fossil fuels. Now, methane is far more effective than carbon dioxide trapping heat. It depends on how high in the atmosphere it is. It gets worse as it goes along. As the heating continues, the oceans warm and the loss of all life predicted in Revelation has been in process for a few decades already. Food, marine crops have lessened to about 10% of what they were in 1950. How about that? As the heating continues, ice is at its lowest level in eons. The vast tundra is thawed. What's tundra? Well,
Frozen ground.
from that comes all sorts of things already bad for us. But the worst part is that it is also releasing pathogens never before seen on Earth while man was present. Remember, we're creationists, but we don't say what the average creationist says. We don't think the Earth is 6,000 years old. It isn't. Okay? It just isn't. You go down anywhere on Earth and you're going to find a layer of blackened ash from the KT divider. Below it, you'll find all kinds of reptiles, giant reptiles, dinosaurs. But you won't find one above the KT. Then little mammals start to appear and they grow up into what we have now. All right? But some of this tundra has stuff in it that's 1 million years old. Remember, when God began to create the sky and the ground was in massive chaos. Okay? Well, the demons were trying to create life and show that God wasn't the creator. We know what happened. All right? And it even refers to these. It says the fallen ones were still alive in the days of Noah. They were still on the earth in the days of Noah. Right? All right, but the point about this is, if you core up something that's 1 million years old, then there's no human being on earth who has immunity to that stuff. Right? The whole theory of the immune system is it works with things that exist and already have existed. I just said all sorts of things already bad for us. Scientists who are interested in this field have begun to study and catalog what's actually in the tundra, from microbes millions of years old to discarded nuclear waste a few decades old. Yeah, they pumped it into the ground because it was frozen, right? It was never going to be a problem, right?
Right, just
it was
put
frozen.
It there, and no one's going to worry about it, and
it's been frozen for
it'll
1 million
stay
years.
that way.
Yeah.
You'll never have to worry about
Yeah.
it. And it won't escape.
It can't escape.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but you know what they say about mice and men and the best laid plans.
Yeah.
Right?
This is, yeah. Far more dangers are appearing the closer folks look at the permafrost. About a quarter of the area of the northern hemisphere. Ah, good. It's not a little area. Melting permafrost in the Arctic could release radioactive waste and awaken sleeping viruses. Yeah, there's tons of articles like this. People became aware. Uh-oh, the tundra is melting. Uh-oh. So you can find lots of these. Until now, scientists did not know the extent of hazards posed by pollutants stored in the permafrost. Everything from microbes and potential viruses to nuclear waste, chemicals, and mercury, said lead study author Kimberly Miner, a science systems engineer with NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab at the California Institute of Technology. Almost no one had ever put all of these different things together, Miner told Life Science. Great. In other words, what it's saying, yeah, it's a perfect storm. Good point. Nice way of saying it. In other words, it's far worse than they first imagined. Now that they're actually looking at it and cataloging it, they realize, oh, this is incredible disaster.
And of course, you're not going to hear much about this on your evening news.
No, that's true. Why these things? You have to sit through long programs on educational TV to even hear about the stuff, right?
So the average person has no knowledge.
No. Does not know anything about this.
And they don't have time to do the research to get into this. If we're grateful that we have you here who has done this research. Now it's right there and we can spread this truth to others.
Yes. And by the way, we're sending all of these slides in printed form to everyone on the list for prophetic notes. Most of the people on the prophetic notes list get notices but don't listen.
Right.
So now we're going to start sending out these studies we'll print them out and send it to them. Then if you're crazy enough not to read it, there's nothing we can do. According to the NOAA...
Life has choices.
Yep.
Choices have consequences.
Yep. According to the NOAA, what is that NOAA?
National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. Okay, there you go.
Yes, NOAA. And they should know, once the methane feedback loop starts, the cascading effect cannot be stopped. Methane feedback loop beyond humans' ability to control may have begun, NOAA. Okay, Robin, what is this talking about? This should be self-explanatory, but let's do it. Okay, so we have methane being released by increasing warming, right?
From the permafrost.
From the permafrost. And some of it comes from clathrates in the bottom of the ocean. But the oceans
Right.
are heating up too.
Right.
Okay. Some of them is normal outgassing from swamps
In the Gulf of Mexico.
in the Gulf of Mexico. All right. So now this causes the heating to increase. But that melts more permafrost and what?
It releases,
Releases more methane. And
more
that's
methane causes more heat.
more heating.
Which releases more
Which-
methane, and it.
And so it's called a methane cascade.
Yeah, there's no
Right.
stopping it.
Well, let me put it this way. It was referred to as a methane cascade in the years 2000 to 2005 because I put it in lots of prophetic notes. Now I notice that the typical phrase is methane feedback loop. Okay? But it's talked about the same thing. But as the permafrost melts, the pestilence part of the Black Horse message, which is first famine, is famine's handmaid, disease, and by disease we mean pandemic types of diseases, plural, right? Across the world. Permafrost thaw could release bacteria and viruses by the European Space Agency. And the NOAA and the ESA interact with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
They, the European Space Agency is looking at the northern part of Europe and the northern part of Russia too. Okay. Because of course, it's to everybody's advantage, including people we hate and want to kill, to know what is happening, right? Okay. So anyway, here we have it. As part of the ESA NASA Arctic Methane and Permafrost Challenge, new research has revealed that rapidly thawing permafrost in the Arctic has the potential to release antibiotic-resistant bacteria, undiscovered viruses, and even radioactive waste from the Cold War nuclear reactors and submarines. Thawing permafrost releases greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and methane, to the atmosphere, as well as causing abrupt changes to the landscape. I found articles where there were pictures of entire cities and villages in Siberia have collapsed, right? They were built on absolutely solid foundation. And some of this may just go down 30 feet, some of it may go down 100 feet, some of it may stay right where it is. It's the luck of the draw. As well as causing abrupt changes to the landscape. Some places you could just see it going like this. However, research published recently in Nature Climate Change found the implications of warming wa-
Waning.
waning permafrost could be much more widespread, with potential for the release of bacteria, unknown viruses, nuclear waste and radiation, and other chemicals of concern. Well, you didn't mention chemicals before, but that makes sense. The paper describes how deep permafrost, at a depth of more than 3 meters, in other words, down 10 feet or more, is one of the few environments on Earth that has not been exposed to modern antibiotics. More than 100 diverse microorganisms in Siberia's deep permafrost have been found to be antibiotic resistant. That's already. Some people say, oh, that's unlikely. It's already been done. It's already been shown. This is not a stupid fear. Right? Got it? It has happened. As the permafrost thaws, there is potential for these bacteria to mix with methane and create new antibiotic strains. Wonderful. We're looking at current events that are rapidly fulfilling the opening sequence, the final opening sequence, right? The Four Horsemen is a sequence that happens all the time, but we're talking about the final sequence, right? And have noted that a true worldwide war results in massive death, the red horse and its rider. Then comes a period of famine and disease that eats away at more parts of the population. Overcrowding won't be a problem as the final cycle of the Four Horsemen proceeds. The fourth horseman and rider bring us to a worldwide body farm situation. What's the body farm? Well, University of Tennessee started it, then the University of Texas, and several others. You take the bodies of folks, probably donated to science, and you think that that's going to be used in a medical school for training in what's inside a human body. But that's not what all of them happen. Some of them are tied up to a tree, the way some people, some bad guys tie up their murder victims. Some are buried in a shallow grave. Some are just left out in the open with all the little animals to scatter the bones. Let's see what's going on. With the dead bodies, real ones are left in varying conditions to see what we can learn about time and cause of death of a decomposing body of a murder victim. It is the putrid green color that characterizes the fourth horse and its rider. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. Now that word pale is unfortunate, because what it really is, most scholars will tell you quickly, it's yellow to yellow-green. It's kind of mossy green. It's kind of what you see when a body's not doing well. And its rider's name was Death, and Hades, that is Sheol, the realm of the dead, followed him. So the fourth horse is exclusively involved in death itself, being dead, right? Because if you're in Hades, you're dead. This is all about folks who are already dead. And when we look at the four things that are listed, the fourth thing is wild animals, right? And I can see why an wild animal would, that was starving to death, would eat a dead body.
Absolutely.
Right? They do that now. Wild animals do that now. But animals who are domestic can turn wild very quickly. It's in their genes. Right? Revelation, as it does so often, leaves all the spurious interpretations behind. Because right there in the summary, the book tells us what the four mean. They were given authority over the fourth of the east to kill with the sword, then with famine. Right? The famine is the result from the sword, and the pestilence, the disease, is the result of the famine. Right? This is a sequence, right? The sequence fits. First the sword, then the famine, then the disease, and then the bodies being eaten by the animals.
Pretty clear.
Yeah, there's nothing hard about that. Right? And I guarantee you, go look at 20 Revelation interpretations and see what it says about this. No, it will just discourage you. There are fools in the biblical sense who think the rider on the white horse is going forth to conquer is Christ. It is Christ who is opening the seals of judgment, for to him all judgment has been given. The human conqueror is a warrior, and the key is that the first weapon he needs in terms of the ancient Roman world is a bow. He needs bowmen to soften up the enemy troops. This is an entirely earthbound human image of the beginning of the sequence that kills billions of human beings. But what about the last part? To kill and by wild beasts of the earth. This is perhaps the only place in Revelation where the English translation gives the full meaning of the word therion. I don't know why we left meaning out. The word does mean a wild beast, in the sense of an animal that is dangerous to humans and is probably a carnivorous hunter. Most of the time, modern English translations usually just read beast. Okay? But here, in order to make the full application, the translators have actually said wild beast. Okay? One of the unintended consequences of globalism, and I should add that the term unintended consequences almost always means bad consequences, is that many plants and animals are going extinct because stronger predators have been introduced into their ecosystem and wrought havoc. Now, I just gave up two rather homely examples. They have to do with my background, and so I respond to it. In my life as a kid, one of the favorite places to go was the Everglades. Get on an airboat, skim over the surface, tie yourself in because you don't want to get thrown out because there's 30 crocodiles right there. I mean alligators right there.
They're waiting.
Yeah. So, and sometimes bump. Oh, we just went over some, right? But it was fun.
As long as your boat doesn't spring a leak.
Right. Or, well, they're flat. They're kind of like a little pier or something.
Yeah, but they may be flat, but they spring a leak, and now you're sitting on the bottom and you're swimming.
Yeah.
And here comes the crocodile, the alligators.
That happened.
Yeah.
A plane taking off from Miami International Airport crashed a few minutes later into the Everglades. And they found a lot of parts of eaten bodies.
Yeah, no doubt.
We hope those folks died in the plane crash.
Yeah.
All right, so the mammals in the Everglades have disappeared. Says this has happened the world over. I chose the Everglades because, as I just said, one of my favorite places. The mammals have disappeared because of an imported snake. Someone released a Burmese python, a killer of mammals, including humans, into the Everglades, and they soon became the dominant species, even attacking huge alligators. Females release up to 200 eggs at a time. And the place is crawling with the snakes. No, I couldn't say crawling, right? I had to say the place is slithering with the snakes. Now, two young men who are called the Gator guys have made a profession out of, well, hunters go to kill these pythons all the time. But these guys have been catching, killing. There's a protocol for killing them properly, taking them into the conservatories so they can do DNA studies and growth patterns and where they're found and so forth, right? The news is all bad. The predators are growing larger every year. Nearly every year brings a new record for length and weight. You look up record size for Burmese pythons in the Everglades, and you'll get a whole bunch of, you'll get a whole different list. Oh, here's 15 feet, here's 17 feet, here's, yeah. So the most recent one was 19 feet.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, these are our pythons. In Burma, they can grow to 40 feet. Oh. And they eat whole human beings, right? As I said earlier, some authorities in Burma said if somebody disappears, we never look to see if they were murdered. We just assume they were eaten by a snake because it's that common. And the snakes attack from the rear. So these two guys, there was even a video of this. They're out there at 1 o'clock in the morning with their two girlfriends.
Yeah, that was this week.
Yeah. You say, this is what you do on a date, right? And the guy's screaming to his girlfriend, grab its tail, don't let it loose. And she's cursing up a storm like a drunken sailor, right? Because she's trying to hold on to this giant snake. And I'm thinking, these are unusual young men and they've got unusual girlfriends.
Yep.
Okay. And of course, stories about humans finding humans in Florida. If you live in South Florida, you find that in your garden there's a 15-foot long python. This is not unusual. You call and get somebody to come take it, right? That's just one of the things you do. Like you have your septic system drained every so often, right? It's just something you do. These particular snakes, the world's longest, only the anaconda weighs more, have developed separately in Florida from their Burmese home. When they're caught and killed and studied, it now appears that genetically they're a cross between the Burmese and Indian python. What that means is some fool released for his pet Burmese python, another fool, or maybe the same fool, released his Indian python, and they hooked up. As I looked out at the woods a few feet from my window, I see several huge trees that are dying and will die if I don't perform my, I should have said raise, usual summer ritual of sawing off the bottoms of the huge vines. I mean, the last one I actually sawed myself was about 4 inches in diameter, right? And it's a vine. And of course, if you leave them on the trees, trees are going to die.
Tarzan vines.
The Tarzan vines, that's a good point.
They strangle the tree.
Yes. Now, when I was a kid, there was pine forest all around us. You'd go out into the pine forest, you'd listen to the beautiful sound of the moaning and the wind in the trees. Shafts of light would come down, sunlight, strike the grasses that grew on the forest floor. Beautiful, beautiful. If it was a hot day, you liked to go into the woods because it was cool, right? And that is not what happens in Florida now. The pine forests I remember in my childhood in the South is gone. There are no soft breezes through pines and shafts of sunlight hitting the grasses on the forest floor. Everything is covered with and being choked by kudzu. Native plants, shrubs, and trees alike dying due to an invasive species. This is happening all over the world, right? I could have chosen much more impressive examples of this destruction of habitat and of animals, right? And where animals are introduced into an area and then a species that has been there for thousands of years is utterly destroyed.
We got that carp in the lakes up in the freshwater lakes up north, jumps out of the water. It's just decimating all the native fish.
It's a much stronger fish, right? Where did it come from?
China.
From China. Okay. Yes, this is a common story, but this is a story that simply means that things will not remain as they are. They will not get better despite what the Antichrist says. Dolly Parton has a new, well, it hasn't come out yet. It's going to come out in November. A new album in which she has left her country roots, and she has famous musicians each singing a song that relates to their career. For instance, Paul McCartney or Stevie Nicks, right? People whose names you would know. And she went across the world and gathered people and created a great album. And the album makes a central point that we have to get together and love or we'll be destroyed. Oh, that's the Antichrist song, right? Because the Antichrist isn't going to talk about obedience and God's authority. The Antichrist is going to talk about love in a very pleasant way and promise good things. But those good things are not going to happen. All right, so it's going to get more miserable. It's downhill from here. If you are older, you are not going to starve to death, right? We already know that God is in charge and that there's no point in taking old people who can't fend well anyway and giving them a miserable death, right? It would be the one place where the grave is a protection. It will be at this time, right? There will be, you know, the fifth seal. What is the fifth seal?
Souls under the altar.
The souls. We got to be careful of that word, souls.
Right.
But the departed martyrs, the dead martyrs, are asking for vengeance for their blood, and the answer is not just yet, not until we've completed the number of those who are to be killed, right? Have there been any martyrs of late?
Oh, there's martyrs occurring all over the place, especially in the Middle East.
Anywhere where there is, well, certainly in China.
Yep.
That's more than 1 billion people right there, 1.5 billion people. But many militant Muslim countries, Christians are fair game to kill. We've seen thousands of martyrs in Iraq, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, right? And across the globe, all the way to Indonesia, right? But there are more martyrs to come, all right? Okay, so we did not plan for a 2-hour. It's actually taken longer than I thought. We did not plan, but I hope you get a picture of some, and we haven't covered this by any means. We're going to continue. Some of the things that are telling us, oh, I can fill in the picture now, right? I knew what the main outline was and what the outcome was, but now I can fill in the picture with specifics and say, yeah. I know the king of the north and the king of the south. I can say China, I can say America. All right? Okay, so you who are listening will get all of these slides. You don't have to ask for the slides because they're going to be printed and come to you as a prophetic notes. And not only to you, but a lot of other people.
For those who are not on the mailing list, who are watching us on YouTube, I will put the links to these articles in the comment notes.
All right. Thank you. Ray knows what he's doing. Ray, you get a lot of praise from people as they write in. Now, thank you. And the Lord said, put my name on the people. Right? And what did he say to them? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. The Lord be gracious to you and give you peace.
Amen.